What if your worst humiliation became the door to your greatest transformation? And what if the man who misjudged you in front of everyone was the same one who couldn't stop watching you walk away? Clara Dawson didn't belong in the glittering room on the 29th floor. She knew it. Everyone else did too. She was there to pass hors d'oeuvres, not to be mistaken for a call girl by the most powerful man in the building. But Nathaniel Cole, CEO of Anderson Group, didn't ask. He assumed. And his assumption nearly destroyed her. Until she didn't crumble. Until she didn't flinch. Until she looked him in the eye and simply walked away. He offered her a job. She said nothing. But that silence, it rewrote everything. What happens when power meets grace, when dignity speaks louder than defense, and when a woman the world tried to erase becomes impossible to ignore? This isn't a love story wrapped in fantasy. It's forged in fire between a man haunted by betrayal and a woman strong enough to never ask for permission. If you've ever been underestimated and still stood tall, this story is yours. Like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Because sometimes the most unforgettable love starts with the deepest misunderstanding. Now, let's begin. The first time Nathaniel Cole laid eyes on Clara Dawson, he thought she was someone she wasn't. It happened on the 29th floor of the Marlowe Grand Hotel, in a private lounge that wasn't meant for people like her. The lights were warm, but sharp. The walls gleamed like old money. Conversations drifted between men in dark suits and women in gowns, stitched to impress. Clara didn't belong there. She knew it the moment she stepped off the elevator and caught her reflection in the glass hair pulled too tight, shoes a size too small, and a borrowed dress with a tag she hadn't dared cut. She was only there because her friend Lila had twisted her ankle and begged her to cover just one evening shift, passing hors d'oeuvres and pretending not to be seen. "Just float the trays and keep moving," Lila had whispered over the phone, her voice tight with pain. "No one will talk to you." But someone did. He stood by the balcony window, facing the city like it owed him something. Tall, unmoving. Tension wrapped around him like a custom-fitted suit, one made of charcoal wool and closed doors. He didn't sip his drink. He didn't look around. He looked at Clara and didn't look away. She averted her eyes, adjusted the tray in her hands, and tried to slip past. But before she reached the next cluster of guests, a voice deep, calm, unnervingly sure, stopped her. "You're early." She blinked. "I'm sorry, they told me you were discreet." His gaze was unreadable, the kind that didn't search it assessed, preferred the back entrance, smart. Clara hesitated, something prickling at the base of her spine. "I think you've made a mistake." He didn't seem surprised. Instead, he reached inside his jacket and handed her a sleek black envelope, gold-stamped, embossed with the logo of Anderson Group. "Penthouse, 30 minutes. Then he turned and walked away, as if the matter was settled. Clara stood frozen. The envelope felt heavier than it should. She looked after him, but he was already gone, swallowed by a room that hadn't even noticed what had just passed between them. She should have said something, corrected him. Thrust the envelope back into his hand. Instead, a staff member in a dark uniform gently touched her elbow. "This way, miss. The VIPs are waiting." She opened her mouth to protest, but the words faltered. Somewhere in the noise, a name echoed. A name she didn't know yet would shift the course of her life. "Mr. Cole doesn't like delays." Clara followed, dazed. At the exit, a woman with a clipboard and no time for nonsense intercepted her. "Clara Dawson," she asked without looking up. "You're on Mr. Cole's onboarding list. 8:30 a.m. Tomorrow at Anderson HQ. Direct report." Clara's pulse skipped. Direct. What assistant to the CEO? The woman confirmed crisply. Dress code enforced. She barely made it home that night. The train ride was a blur. Her apartment was dim and quiet. Her brother Ryan already asleep. She poured herself a glass of water, stared at the envelope on the table, and wondered how one man's mistake could land so cleanly on her doorstep, and whether it was truly a mistake at all. By morning, she had convinced herself it was a misunderstanding, that she'd show up, explain, apologize, and be quietly dismissed. But when she walked into the Anderson Group building, all glass and marble, with a lobby that echoed, no one questioned her presence. The woman at the reception desk simply looked up and smiled. "Mr. Cole is expecting you." She rode the elevator alone, her reflection climbing beside her. The doors opened onto a floor so quiet it felt like a church made of steel. At the far end, behind seamless glass walls, he waited. Nathaniel Cole, the man who thought she was someone else, and gave her a key to something she hadn't asked for. He didn't look surprised when she entered. He didn't even stand. "You came," he said simply. "I wasn't sure I should. I was." She looked around the room. It was sleek, understated, not a single paper out of place. It made her feel loud just by existing. "I think you confused me with someone," she said. "Last night." "I did. And yet, you offered me a job." "I did," he repeated. Why Nathaniel stood now, slowly, hands in pockets. "Because you didn't panic. You didn't scramble to fix it. You stood your ground." She hesitated. "That's not a qualification. It's a rare one." He handed her a file, thick paper. No frills. A salary number was printed in neat type near the bottom. She blinked. "I haven't even interviewed. I just watched you hold your composure through the kind of mistake that sinks careers." She didn't reply. Couldn't. And somehow, that silence sealed it. She signed nothing that day, said yes to nothing. But she left with a badge, a code to the elevator, and a beginning she didn't know how to name. The badge was cold in Clara's hand. It bore her name, printed in clean, block letters beneath the Anderson Group logo. Below that, a single word, executive, as if she had earned it, as if she had asked for it. She hadn't. When she stepped off the elevator that morning, no one looked up. The glass doors slid open silently, revealing a floor of sleek surfaces and people who walked too fast to greet each other. Clara kept her head down, clutching her canvas bag like armor. She'd dressed carefully, slacks, flats, a crisp white shirt borrowed from Lila's closet. She looked like someone trying to belong. Nathaniel Cole hadn't arrived yet. His assistant, or rather, the assistant whose desk Clara was now apparently meant to sit at, had cleared out overnight. Not a paper left behind, not a post-it, just a small silver key resting in the top drawer. No note, no explanation. Clara sat. Time passed like fog, slow but disorienting. At 9:12, the elevator chimed. Heads lifted. Clara's stomach tightened. He walked in without ceremony. No entourage, no coat. Just a man in a tailored navy suit with a phone in one hand and a file in the other. He glanced at her once, then kept walking. She rose instinctively. "Mr. Cole, you'll want to keep a digital calendar open at all times," he said without slowing. "Meetings run back to back. I don't reschedule." She blinked. I thought, maybe we should discuss my role first. He paused at his office door and turned. "Your role is to keep up. I don't do training wheels." Then he disappeared behind glass. For a long time, Clara stood motionless. She wasn't easily rattled. Years of working nights at the hospital cafeteria, juggling bills, caregiving for Ryan, she knew how to adapt. But this was different. This wasn't chaos. It was control. Precision so sharp, it cut without warning. She sat back down, breathed in, then opened the computer and started reading. His schedule was brutal. Meetings every 20 minutes, memos by the dozen, names of people who sounded more like institutions than individuals. Clara reached for her notebook. Paper made more sense to her. She needed to see it laid out, hand-drawn, imperfect. Within an hour, she'd mapped the week. By the second hour, she'd flagged conflicting travel dates and rebooked a client dinner he'd overlooked. By noon, Nathaniel emerged. He scanned her notes with a glance. "You moved Reyes to Thursday. She's flying in a day late." He nodded. "Good." No smile. No acknowledgement beyond that one syllable. And yet, something shifted. Later that day, she overheard two analysts whispering near the coffee bar. "That's the new one. She's temporary." Right, no clue. But Cole hasn't yelled yet, so that's new. At 6:45 p.m., when most of the office had emptied, Clara was still typing. She hadn't eaten. She barely noticed. Nathaniel passed by on his way out. He stopped. Just briefly. "You should go home. I'm almost done," she said. "There will always be more." He said it like a warning, not advice. She shut down her screen a minute later, but his words followed her all the way back to her apartment through the subway ride, the flickering lights of downtown, and the quiet creak of her front door. Ryan looked up from the kitchen table, where he was sketching again. He smiled, the kind that asked everything without speaking. "Long day," he signed. Clara dropped her bag and nodded. Then she signed back. "I'm not sure what I just started." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Do you want to quit?" She paused, then shook her head. "No." She didn't say why, not yet. But in the pit of her stomach, she felt it, that strange flicker, not quite fear, not quite fascination, a sense that she had been thrown into a storm and might somehow learn how to fly through it. Nathaniel Cole didn't believe in luck. He believed in data, in precision, in results that could be measured, projected, and protected. The idea of chaos, of leaving anything up to chance, made his skin crawl. That's why he built Anderson Group the way he did, floor by floor, system by system, until no one could walk through the front doors without a badge, a purpose, and a reason to be there. Clara Dawson had none of those things, and yet she was still at her desk. On the third morning. Nathaniel paused behind the one-way glass outside his office. From this angle, she couldn't see him. She was bent over a stack of reports, lips pursed in concentration, a pen tapping rhythmically against her notebook. He watched her for a moment longer than he meant to. She didn't fidget, didn't check her phone. She simply worked. He turned away, unsettled by something he couldn't quite name. People often mistook Nathaniel's silence for indifference. In truth, he listened more than he spoke, not because he was cold, but because he had learned the hard way that words, once spoken, could be twisted, sold, and used as weapons. Years ago, in a boardroom not unlike the one he sat in now, he had learned that lesson the hard way. Her name had been Evelyn Hart. She had been his partner in business, in belief, in what he thought was love. Together, they launched a platform that redefined digital logistics. The world called them a power couple. Investors called them unstoppable. And for a time, they were, until one morning, she sold her shares behind his back. The betrayal wasn't in the sale. It was in the silence. In the way she kissed him goodbye that morning, like nothing had changed. In the way she stood at the press conference later that week with a smile that had nothing to do with sorrow. Nathaniel had learned then that trust was a currency too expensive to spend twice. Still, Clara was different, and that disturbed him more than he cared to admit. She wasn't charming. She didn't try to impress. She didn't flirt or flatter or echo his opinions. She simply worked, efficiently, quietly. And when she didn't know something, she admitted it without apology. That Thursday, she knocked on his door precisely at 10:00 a.m. with a scheduling conflict in hand. He glanced up. "Problem, your meeting with the Stanford delegation overlaps with your investor call," she said. "They're both too important to move, but there's a 30-minute window at noon you haven't used." He considered. "Move Stanford to noon. Keep the call." She hesitated. "There's a lunch with the logistics team at 12. He looked at her. "I don't do lunch meetings." Her face didn't flinch. "They've already booked the room and the meal." He leaned back, studying her. "You're saying I should skip the call, I'm saying. You'll make a better impression in person." There it was, again, that calm certainty. No begging, no defensiveness. Just a point, made cleanly. He nodded once. "Fine. Reschedule the call." She turned to leave, then paused. "I read your keynote from last year," she said. "The one you gave at the Green Tech Summit." He raised an eyebrow. "Did you said, growth without grounding is just expansion, and expansion without vision is chaos." She met his gaze. "That's not a quote from a strategist. That's from someone who lost something." For a moment, Nathaniel said nothing. Then, quietly, "You like reading people." "Clara." She shrugged. I've had to. He didn't ask why. He knew the weight behind that kind of answer. That night. Nathaniel stayed later than usual. The office was dim, hushed. Outside, the city glowed, soft and restless. He poured himself a glass of water, sat at his desk, and opened a drawer he rarely touched. Inside was a photo, old, creased, taken on a balcony somewhere in Prague. He and Evelyn were laughing. She had her arm around him. He was smiling. He hadn't looked like that in years. Nathaniel closed the drawer. Trust, he reminded himself, was not something you gave. It was something you lost the moment you assumed it would always be there. And yet, Clara, she didn't ask for it, didn't demand it. But somehow, he had started giving it to her anyway. Silence, Clara learned, wasn't absence. It was the currency of Anderson Group. It moved through the hallways like air invisible, expected, sometimes suffocating. People spoke in short bursts, rarely made eye contact, and always stepped aside when Nathaniel Cole walked by. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. Orders were passed with a glance, a nod, a line scrawled in the margin of a document. And somehow, that was louder than shouting. Clara wasn't used to that. She came from kitchens filled with noise, hospital wings buzzing with alarms, a childhood where the only way to be heard was to speak louder than the storm. But here, she had to learn a new language, a quiet one spoken in restraint. And surprisingly, she wasn't bad at it. Each morning, she arrived before him. She reviewed the day's schedule, flagged potential conflicts, and lined up the briefings he liked to read first. She had memorized the floor plan of Anderson's Boston headquarters by her second week, understood the internal politics by the third, and by the fourth, people had stopped whispering when she passed. They still looked, though, still wondered, is she the one from the gala? She wasn't recruited. She just appeared. No one gets close to Cole like that. She ignored it. She had no choice. Every evening, she rode the train home with aching feet and a full notebook, dropped her bag on the kitchen table, and smiled at Ryan even when she didn't feel like it. He always asked, "Did anything change today?" And she always answered, "Only everything," quietly. By the start of her second month, Clara could read Nathaniel's moods with unsettling precision. She could tell from the angle of his jaw when a meeting had gone poorly, from the way he flicked his pen when an email annoyed him, from how long he paused before answering a question longer meant he was trying not to speak out of anger. But what unnerved her most was that he never praised, he never thanked. The only measure that she was doing well was that she was still there. Until one afternoon, long after lunch, before sunset, he handed her a press release draft and said, "Read it." She skimmed quickly, noting phrases that felt forced. When she looked up, he was watching her. "It's trying too hard," she said. "Reads like you're scared of saying something wrong, so you said nothing at all." Nathaniel's expression didn't shift, but after a beat, he said, "Rewrite the third paragraph." She did. He nodded once. "That's better." That was all. No praise, no smile, but something in his voice. It stayed with her the whole train ride home. The next day, a note appeared on her desk. No name, no handwriting she recognized, just 5 words. "He doesn't keep people long." Clara stared at it for a moment, then folded it neatly and tucked it into the bottom drawer. She didn't bring it up. She didn't need to. Instead, she worked. She became the buffer between Nathaniel and the world, the one who filtered calls, rearranged chaos, calmed departments on the verge of implosion. And he noticed, not with words, but in the way he paused to listen when she spoke, the way he handed her confidential files without hesitation, the way his eyes lingered half a second longer when she entered the room. But still, he said nothing. And she not quite knowing what it would mean if he did said nothing in return. One Friday evening, when the office had gone still and the city lights outside shimmered like a memory, Clara stood by the windows of the 30th floor. She looked out at Boston, sprawling and imperfect, full of people moving too fast, trying too hard. She wondered if she had become one of them. Behind her, Nathaniel's voice broke the quiet. "You don't speak much in meetings," he said. She turned slowly. "That's not what I'm there for." He studied her, then said, maybe it should be. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she nodded once and walked past him, back to her desk, her shoulders straighter than before. And for the first time since she walked into Anderson Group, she felt like maybe she wasn't surviving. She was becoming something. Whispers. Clara learned, carried more weight than orders in a place like Anderson Group. They lived in break rooms, behind elevator doors, and inside glances passed like currency between those too polite to speak plainly and too bored to stay silent. She heard them not always clearly, not always directly, but enough. Did you see her at the investor dinner? She sits right outside his office. That's not an assistant. That's an invitation. She came out of nowhere. Doesn't have a degree, no references. Maybe that's exactly why he hired her. The words didn't cut. Not at first. Not like they used to when she was younger, scrubbing trays in the back of a hospital, or being told by supervisors she was too smart to waste herself but not credentialed enough to move up. But the whispers didn't come alone this time. They came with eyes. People started watching her. Her inbox filled faster. Her mistakes, even small ones, were no longer just corrected, but commented on. She noticed files on her desk that she hadn't requested, invitations to meetings that felt more like tests than tasks. The honeymoon, it seemed, was over. It didn't help that Nathaniel had begun bringing her into more rooms, not just to take notes, but to speak. He asked for her insight during project reviews, called her into strategy sessions without notice. Once, during a heated product design pitch, he interrupted the entire room to say, "Clara, what do you see that we're missing?" She hadn't even known she was expected to contribute, but she had answered, calmly, clearly, and without apology. After the meeting, one of the directors, Victoria Ames, approached her near the copy room. Tall, sharp, polished to perfection. Victoria didn't offer her hand, just a look. "You're fast," she said. "That's rare." Clara met her gaze. "I try to be useful." Victoria smiled, slow and knowing. "Just be careful not to confuse access with permanence. He cycles through trust like seasons." And then she was gone. Clara didn't tell Nathaniel about the comment. She didn't need to. But that night, she lay awake longer than usual. The sentence echoed like a warning she'd heard before, but hadn't listened to until it was too late. The next morning, Clara arrived to find her desk, rearranged, not drastically, but the chair had been replaced. Her personal notebook was gone, replaced by a company-branded pad. Her mug, the one Ryan had given her that said "Grace in Progress," had vanished. No one claimed responsibility. She didn't complain. Instead, she pulled a clean page from the new pad and wrote at the top in bold ink, "What I keep is mine. What I lose teaches me more." That afternoon, the quarterly gala consumed the entire building. Everyone wore their polished best. Cameras flashed. Investors flowed like silk through corridors that usually smelled like burnt coffee and stress. Nathaniel, of course, looked effortless. Clara stood beside him, headset in place, quietly coordinating from the shadows. She was used to it now, the half-second pauses before he looked to her, the way he seemed to register the room through her eyes. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it usually came after she said something first. People noticed, and this time, they didn't just whisper behind her. They whispered to her face. "Funny how fast you've climbed," someone murmured over a glass of champagne. "Makes you wonder what rung you skipped." She didn't flinch. She'd lived through worse. But later that night, in the privacy of her apartment, she opened her laptop and found something waiting. A screenshot. A blurry photo from the very first night at the Marlowe Grand Nathaniel, handing her that black envelope. Her name wasn't attached, but the implication was obvious. Clara stared at the screen, her heart tightening. She closed the laptop slowly, then rose and walked to the kitchen. Ryan was eating cereal, legs tucked under him, reading a comic book. She leaned against the counter, silent. "You okay?" He signed. She considered, then signed back. "Truth doesn't matter if the lie sounds better." He paused, then added quietly, "But the truth lasts longer." That night, before bed, She took out her old notebook, the one she thought had been thrown away, and found it buried beneath the office recycling bin in the basement. The mug was broken, but the words had stayed, grace in progress. And for the first time since she started the job, Clara wondered if even grace had a limit. It started like all storms do, quiet. Just a vibration on her phone at first. A single message from a number she didn't recognize. You should see this. Clara didn't click the link right away. She was reviewing a legal memo outside Nathaniel's office, waiting for a board meeting to end. The morning had been smooth, suspiciously so. Everything had run on time, no surprises, no glitches, no need for her to raise her voice or her eyes. But when she opened her browser, the air shifted. There it was, front page of one of the most vicious gossip blogs in the country, a grainy, zoomed-in photo, cropped and color-corrected for drama. Nathaniel Cole hands envelope to mystery woman in black, private hire or something else. Below it, a headline in bold power, privilege, and the private elevator, CEO's assistant or companion. No names, no confirmations. But it didn't matter. The image did the work. The narrative wrote itself. By noon. Whispers turned to glances. Glances turned to stares. And by 3 p.m., a folder marked HR review was slid onto Clara's desk like a quiet ultimatum. She didn't open it, not right away. Instead, she stared at the office door, the one behind which Nathaniel had remained since morning. No calls, no messages, no acknowledgement, nothing. She knocked once around 4:30, no answer. Again at 5:10, still nothing. And still, she stayed. Not because she lacked the strength to leave, but because her silence was stronger than their assumptions. At 6:45, the door finally opened. He stepped out, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, his expression unreadable, not angry, not surprised, just composed. "Clara," he said softly, "come in." She followed him inside. The room was dim. The only light came from the city below, filtering in like judgment through glass. Nathaniel didn't sit. He stood by the window, one hand in his pocket, the other flexing restlessly. "You've seen it," he said. "Of course I have." A beat. Is it true? The question hit harder than the headline. Clara swallowed. Hard. Are you really asking me that? Nathaniel's eyes didn't waver. I need to know if there's anything I missed, anything I didn't see. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You mean anything you haven't already assumed? He exhaled, jaw tightening. You gave me a job based on a mistake, she continued. But everything else I earned. You know that. Silence. She took a step back. And if you're questioning me now, maybe I was wrong about you all along. Something cracked behind his eyes, not anger, something softer. Guilt, maybe, or fear. You're not wrong, he said finally. Clara blinked. I beg your pardon, I didn't see you clearly. Not then. Maybe not even now. He looked down. But I never doubted your work, and I never believed that article. Then why ask? She asked. Because I've spent years building something that doesn't tolerate uncertainty, he replied. I've learned to question everything. She nodded once, then said, quietly, and what if questioning me is the very thing that made you lose me? He didn't respond, so she gave him silence in return and walked away. Clara didn't go home that night. She didn't return to her apartment, where Ryan would be waiting with too many questions and too few answers. Instead, she checked into a small guest house north of the city, one her friend Lila had once mentioned, tucked into the woods, where cell service was weak and judgment couldn't follow. She stayed 3 nights, didn't check the news, didn't respond to calls, didn't explain, because some truths didn't need defending. They just needed time to breathe. When she finally opened her inbox again, it was full. Hundreds of messages, some cruel, some curious, most indifferent. But one caught her attention, not because of what it said, but because of who sent it. Victoria Ames. Subject line. Didn't think you'd last this long. No body, just a single image attached. Clara opened it. It was the original photo. Only this version had metadata. and in the corner of the file, not visible unless you knew where to look, was the source. Internal PR system. Logged in under E. Heart. Clara sat back. And for the first time since the storm hit, she smiled. Not because the damage was undone, but because the truth had finally found a thread to pull. The truth, Clara had always believed, was something you either ran from or ran toward. She had never been good at running. The moment she saw Evelyn Hart's initials on that file, the picture became clearer, not clean, not without shadows, but clearer. Evelyn. Of course, a name she'd heard only once, in a fleeting mention, buried in the middle of a strategy meeting. Nathaniel hadn't lingered on it, just one syllable, dropped like a pebble into water he didn't want disturbed, but now the ripples had reached her, and still. He said nothing. Back in the city, the air had changed. Anderson Group had gone from cold to colder. Clara entered through the underground entrance to avoid the eyes, the cameras, the whispers now sharpened into certainty. When she reached her desk, everything looked untouched but felt rearranged. She sat slowly, as if the floor beneath her might give out. The HR folder was still there, untouched, like a ghost. Nathaniel hadn't summoned her. He hadn't fired her. He just hadn't spoken. By early afternoon, Clara's thoughts were no longer about damage control. They were about what silence really meant. Nathaniel's silence wasn't passive. It wasn't absence. It was a choice, a shield, a space he stepped into so he didn't have to reach out. And for the first time since stepping into his world, Clara no longer felt challenged by it. She felt exhausted by it. She knocked on his door once. He didn't answer, but this time, she opened it anyway. Nathaniel looked up, his expression unreadable, his hands folded too carefully in front of him. "I know it wasn't you," she said. "I know who leaked the image. I have proof." A pause. Then Evelyn. Clara nodded. "You knew I suspected." She folded her arms. "And you didn't say anything." Nathaniel stood. He looked tired, not in the way executives look after a long week, but in the way people look when they've spent years walking around their own walls. "I didn't want to give her more oxygen," he said, "but you let me suffocate instead." The question landed hard. He blinked once, as if bracing. "I didn't mean for it to hurt you." "No," she said, voice low. "But it did anyway." She stared at him, waiting for the apology that didn't come. Instead, he asked, "Why are you still here?" And for the first time, she didn't have a clear answer. That evening, Clara found herself in the break room, staring at a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Outside, the city hummed with late-night traffic and boardroom lights. Inside, it was quiet enough to hear her own thoughts. She remembered something Ryan once told her when they were younger and had to move for the third time in a year. You don't always leave because of what happened. Sometimes, you leave because of what didn't. She sipped the tea. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. She packed her things after dark. Not everything, just enough. Enough to make her absence feel like more than a pause. No drama, no slammed doors, no emails sent just to clarify. She left the HR folder unopened on her desk, left her badge inside it, and one note, written in her clean, steady handwriting. The silence didn't break me, but it did tell me everything. Nathaniel found the note the next morning. He didn't call her, didn't send anyone after her. He just stood at her empty desk, the badge still warm in his hand. And for the first time in years, he realized his silence hadn't protected anything. It had cost him everything he didn't know he was trying to keep. There was no goodbye, no final conversation, no dramatic confrontation, just a desk left empty, a badge turned in, and a note that said enough. Clara didn't want closure. She wanted space. And for the first time in a long while, she gave it to herself. The house where she landed wasn't hers. It belonged to a friend, an old college roommate who now lived in Vermont, tucked between pine trees and quiet lakes. The kind of place where phone service faded and porch lights felt like warmth, not surveillance. She didn't tell Ryan the full story, just said she needed to breathe. He understood. Clara spent her mornings reading by the window, her afternoons walking gravel trails, and her evenings stirring soup she barely tasted. Some nights she thought about Anderson Group. Most nights she didn't. Meanwhile, in Boston, the storm hadn't settled. The scandal faded from headlines, but its aftershocks remained. Whispers turned to rumors, then to silence the kind that left a stain. Nathaniel issued a formal denial. Anderson Group threatened legal action. Evelyn Hart's access was revoked quietly. Her name removed from boards and contracts with surgical precision. No lawsuit, no press release, just disappearance. Because in Nathaniel's world, silence was the final verdict. But it didn't undo the damage. Not the public one, and certainly not the personal one. 7 days after Clara left, Nathaniel opened a locked drawer in his office and pulled out a file, not one tied to business, but to surveillance. He scanned the system logs. It had been Evelyn, accessed through a dormant PR account, tracked, time-stamped, confirmed. The photo, the leak, the entire narrative, all fabricated, all intentional, and all too late. He didn't call his legal team, didn't call Clara. Instead, Nathaniel got into his car, no driver, no assistant, and drove north, 4 hours, past the city, through the woods, until pavement turned to gravel and the trees grew taller than buildings ever had. When he knocked on the door of the cabin, he wasn't sure she would answer. But she did. Barefoot, wrapped in a sweater, her hair tied back like she hadn't meant to make an impression. She looked at him not with anger, but with distance. "How did you find me?" she asked. "The lease on the car," he said. It was still in the system. Clara didn't speak, just stepped aside. He walked in, slow, cautious. The air smelled like pine and something warm on the stove. Ryan wasn't there, maybe out, maybe giving them space. Nathaniel stood in the quiet. "I have the proof," he said. "I know. I published the findings in the internal report. You've been fully cleared." Clara nodded once. "That doesn't clear the silence," she said. He sat in a chair by the window. The sun was setting behind him. His voice, when it came, was lower than she remembered. "I'm not good at this," he admitted. "I've spent most of my life managing risk, controlling perception. I don't know how to lose people, or how to keep them the right way. I never asked you to keep me." "I know," he said. "That's why it mattered." A long pause. Then he looked up. "That's why I'm asking now." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Asking what? To come back?" She turned away, hands resting on the kitchen counter. "You can't say that like it's some kind of offer." "It's not an offer," he said. "It's a hope." There it was, the quiet crack in his voice, the human under the glass. She turned back to face him. "I needed space," she said. "I needed to know who I was without your world around me." And now he asked. She took a breath, looked at him, really looked. "I'm still me," she said. "I don't miss the elevators or the agendas, but I do miss something." His brow lifted. "What you," she said, "before the silence, before I had to protect myself from something you should have protected me from." Something softened in his face. It wasn't relief. It wasn't triumph. It was something far more honest. Gratitude. They didn't speak for a while. After Clara's words, Nathaniel just sat there, his elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tightly, the posture of a man who had faced down hostile boards in billion-dollar negotiations, but now found himself uncertain for the first time in years. Clara watched him from across the small kitchen. The kettle was hissing softly on the stove, its rising whistle the only sound between them. "You could have ended it earlier," she finally said. "I know. You could have said my name. You could have answered the headline with more than a press release. I know that too." He looked up, eyes heavier now. "But I didn't. Not because I didn't believe you, but because I thought staying silent would keep it smaller." She gave a bitter, almost tired smile. "It didn't." "No," he said. "It didn't." Nathaniel handed her a small black folder from inside his coat. Not business branded. No Anderson Group watermark. Just a simple manila report, printed clean, stamped with 3 initials at the top corner, E. H. Evelyn Hart. Inside were records of login data, File access, a timeline. It was methodical, damning. She used an old internal PR credential. He explained, slipped through when we transferred systems. She didn't want money, she wanted erasure. Clara flipped through the pages slowly. She saw you sitting in the space she thought would always be hers. He added, so she made sure the world saw you the way she needed them to. Clara shook her head, and the world didn't even ask if it was true. No, Nathaniel said, they never do. Back at Anderson, things had shifted again. The scandal had lost its sharpest edges, but the wound remained open, not from public opinion, but from what it revealed. That silence wasn't just a personal failing. It was a corporate policy. Too many people had known the truth or suspected it and said nothing. Not because they believed the lie, but because siding with power was safer than standing by principle. Victoria Ames had remained conspicuously neutral. She's not behind it, Nathaniel clarified, but she didn't stop it either, and the others. He shook his head. I don't know yet, but I will. That night, back in the Vermont cabin, Clara and Nathaniel sat at opposite ends of the fireplace. The logs cracked softly between them. A half-finished cup of tea sat untouched at her feet. What are you going to do? She asked. Clean house, he said. Quietly. Clara raised an eyebrow. Quiet doesn't fix culture. Nathaniel. He paused. Then I'll make noise. A beat. I'll start with the people who looked the other way. She watched him for a moment, then leaned back into the armchair. I don't want revenge, she said softly. I just don't want another woman to have to prove she isn't what the room assumes. Nathaniel nodded. His voice, when it came, was low. Then we make sure the room changes. 3 days later, they returned to Boston. No press, no announcements, no new titles. Clara didn't walk into the building as his assistant. She walked in as a consultant, an outside voice with inside experience, tasked with auditing the company's culture and ethics structure. The board resisted. At first, but Nathaniel backed her publicly, and the team that once whispered now watched with quiet attention, especially when, during her first review meeting, Clara turned to the board chair and asked plainly, "What are you afraid of?" No one answered, but everyone heard. Over the next few weeks, a new rhythm formed. Nathaniel sat in more meetings than he had in years, not to talk, but to listen. Clara met with team leads, interns, HR staff, and junior analysts who had never been asked how they felt about the culture that surrounded them. And slowly, patterns emerged: fear, silence, assumptions dressed as norms. It hadn't just been Evelyn's sabotage that made the gossip stick. It had been the culture's willingness to believe it. In a private meeting room one afternoon, Clara met again with Victoria Ames. The room was quiet, just the two of them. I know you didn't start the fire, Clara said, but you watched it burn. Victoria didn't flinch, and now you get to be the phoenix. No, Clara replied. I just chose not to turn to ash. On her way out of the room, Victoria said, be careful. That man, he doesn't always know how to protect people, even the ones he loves. Clara paused, then looked over her shoulder. Maybe not, but this time, he's learning. It was just past 9:00 p.m. when Clara heard the knock. Not sharp, not urgent. Just 3 soft raps against the old wooden frame of her apartment door, the kind of knock that didn't demand to be answered, but hoped it might be. She opened it slowly. Nathaniel stood there, a worn canvas folder under his arm, his coat unbuttoned, his tie missing. For once, he didn't look like the man whose name headlined tech summits and IPO briefings. He looked tired, human, and more importantly, uncertain. I didn't want to call, he said. I thought it should be real. Clara raised an eyebrow. And this is your version of real. A faint smile tugged at his mouth. I'm trying. She stepped aside. Wordlessly, he entered. The apartment was quiet. Ryan had gone to stay with a friend. A single lamp lit the room, and the smell of baked bread still lingered faintly in the air. Clara moved to the kitchen without offering tea. Nathaniel followed, but stayed just far enough to let her lead the space. I read the internal memo, she said, pouring water into 2 glasses. You really did it." He nodded. "We're restructuring the board's oversight. Evelyn's been removed from all accounts. Victoria was formally censured." Clara handed him a glass but didn't sit. "So this is an update," she asked. "A business check-in." "No," he said. "This is me, hoping you'll ask me to stay a little longer." She finally sat, and for a moment, they just drank their water in silence. Then Nathaniel reached for the folder. Inside was a single sheet handwritten, a little uneven, like it had been rewritten more than once. She looked up at him, brow raised. "I used to think loyalty was about who stayed quiet the longest," he said, "but I've come to realize it's about who speaks when the silence starts hurting." She read the words, nothing dramatic, just 5 lines for the woman I doubted, for the silence that cost us both, for the loyalty that never asked to be tested, for the strength I didn't recognize, and for the second chance I won't waste. Clara closed the folder, her fingers resting gently on its edge. "Is that a poem?" she asked softly. "I don't know what it is," he admitted. "Just something I needed to say on paper before I lost the courage to say it out loud." She met his eyes. "Do you want me back?" "As your assistant Noan," he said, without hesitation. "As my equal. As someone who's already done more than anyone in that building ever had the nerve to." She nodded once, but she didn't answer. Not yet. The night stretched between them. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't talk about Evelyn or HR folders or hallway rumors. They talked about books, about Ryan's art, about the fact that Nathaniel hadn't cooked a real meal in 6 years and once tried to use a rice cooker without water. Clara laughed, the kind of laugh that didn't ask permission, and Nathaniel watched her with the quiet ache of someone realizing they almost let something sacred slip through their fingers. Before he left, she walked him to the door. He paused there. "I still don't know how to be all the things you deserve," he said. Clara leaned gently against the frame. "I don't need all the things," she replied. "I just need the truth, spoken, not assumed." He nodded. "Then I'll start there." That night, she didn't sleep right away. She stood by the window, the city blinking below her like it always did, impatient, unfinished. But in her chest, something had settled, not resolved, but no longer raw, and sometimes that was enough. Clara didn't return to her old desk. She didn't return as someone to assist, support, or shadow. She returned as someone seen. The official title was Director of Strategic Vision, a role vague enough to confuse outsiders, but clear enough to insiders she was there to lead, not to wait for instructions. And Nathaniel. He introduced her at the Monday all-hands meeting with a voice steady and unapologetic. "Clara Dawson will be joining us in a new capacity. She'll be helping redefine not just how we grow, but why. You'll listen to her, and you'll learn from her." He didn't smile. He didn't have to. His tone said what his silence used to swallow. This woman matters. The whispers didn't vanish overnight. People still looked, still speculated, still questioned what wasn't printed in job descriptions. But Clara had changed. She didn't look away anymore, didn't flinch when someone said, "lucky break" or "interesting rise." She walked through the Anderson Group corridors with her head up, clipboard in one hand, coffee in the other, the new uniform of quiet authority. She still answered questions, but no longer justified her presence. And that difference echoed. Nathaniel, too, had changed. He still carried himself with control, the kind that came from years of needing to be the calmest person in the room. But now he paused. He asked. He stayed in meetings longer than necessary, not to dominate, but to listen. Clara noticed it first in the small things, like the way he shifted his seat slightly to face her when she spoke, or how he caught himself before interrupting, choosing to let her finish, even when the boardroom tension hung thick. One afternoon, after a particularly intense investor meeting, he followed her into the strategy room and closed the door quietly behind him. "I used to think silence was strength," he said. Clara glanced up from her notes. "And now I know it's a habit, one I'm trying to break." She didn't say anything for a moment, then offered, "Break it by speaking when it's uncomfortable, not just when it's convenient." He nodded. "I will." The Anderson team began to adjust not just to her presence, but to the new tone she brought. Departments became more collaborative. Feedback loops reopened. The HR office, once avoided like a plague, became a place people actually walked into with confidence. Clara didn't overhaul the system. She simply reintroduced humanity into it. One Thursday evening, long after the offices had emptied, Nathaniel found her in the staff lounge, curled into a corner chair, laptop balanced on her knees. He stepped in without a word and placed a coffee beside her, the same kind she always ordered. No sugar, a little cinnamon. "You missed your moment on stage," he said gently, referring to the product launch gala the week before. She looked up, amused. "I wasn't looking for one. Maybe, but it found you anyway." She smiled at that, not the polite kind, the real kind, the kind she rarely gave out loud. Later that night, as they rode the elevator down together in silence, Clara leaned against the wall and said quietly, "You know, I used to think power looked like offices with glass walls." He turned to her, curious. "And now I know. It looks like standing beside someone who never asked you to prove your worth." Nathaniel exhaled that quiet, small breath people take when something lands deeper than they expected. "I never want you behind me again," he said. "You never had to ask." She replied, "They didn't throw a party. There was no ribbon cutting, no catered rooftop event to mark the milestone. Instead, Clara found a handwritten note tucked under the corner of her desk one morning. It was Nathaniel's handwriting, even deliberate, familiar by now. "Thank you for staying in the story." That was all. No logo, no signature, just 7 words that felt like a quiet vow. She read it once, then twice. And when she finally looked up, she saw him across the room standing by the window, coffee in hand, his posture less guarded than usual. He didn't wave, didn't nod, but the way he looked at her wasn't from across the room. It was from where they both now stood, side by side. Their days settled into something neither had expected: routine, but not the kind that numbs. Clara came in early, left when the work was done, and no longer checked behind herself for approval. Nathaniel, for his part, began to linger in places he used to avoid: staff lounges, hallway conversations, even the occasional Friday lunch with the team. He was still quiet, still measured, but now he spoke up when it mattered. Once, during a leadership retreat, an executive questioned Clara's position not rudely, but with that subtle skepticism too many women know too well. Nathaniel didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "She's not here to prove herself. She already did that when the rest of us failed to act. No one questioned her again." Months passed. The Anderson Group shifted not dramatically, but meaningfully. A new mentorship program launched. HR protocols were rewritten. Clara sat on every ethics review panel, and for the first time in company history, an internal audit on gender bias was conducted, led by her. But the biggest change wasn't structural. It was cultural. People started looking each other in the eye again, asking questions out loud, leaving less in the shadows. And Nathaniel, once called the man behind the glass, became the man who showed up, not with grand gestures, but with presence. On the anniversary of Clara's first day, the day she walked into the Marlowe Grand, wearing a borrowed dress and holding a tray she wasn't supposed to carry, Nathaniel took her to a small, independent bookstore. Not flashy, not curated, just shelves filled with stories that smelled like ink and possibility. "This place almost closed," he said, unlocking the front door. "We restored it. Quietly. In your name." She stepped inside, breath caught between surprise and something deeper. "You didn't have to." "I didn't," he said. "I wanted to." There, between shelves of forgotten titles, she found a small framed photo near the register, her badge, the original one, next to a copy of his first business card. Underneath, a single sentence. She stayed, not because she had to, but because this time, it was hers to choose. They never made a big announcement about their relationship. There were no Instagram captions, no diamond-studded declarations, but those who knew them really knew them, saw it in the way they moved around each other. The soft check-ins, the pause before decisions, the way they let each other speak, and listened fully when they did. They didn't become perfect. They became real. One night, Clara stood at her window again, just like she had the night after she first walked away. The city hadn't changed, but she had. Nathaniel came up behind her, arms crossed casually, not touching just near enough that she could feel the warmth of him without needing to close the gap. "Do you think people ever really change?" she asked. He considered, then replied, "I think people become more of what they already were, once they feel safe enough." She smiled. "Then I'm still me." He looked at her with soft certainty. "And that's exactly who I fell for." She was judged before she spoke, silenced before she had the chance to be heard, and yet she chose not to scream. She chose to stand. Clara Dawson's story reminds us. Sometimes, strength doesn't come in noise. It comes in knowing who you are, even when the world tells you what you're not. It's a story about second chances. But more than that, it's about the right to not be defined by prejudice, to not be measured by whispers, and to not be punished for standing tall in a room where you were never invited, but deeply needed. We hope this story left something in your heart, a warmth, a reflection, maybe even a question. If it did, please like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Because these aren't just stories, they're quiet rebellions. They're reminders that dignity always deserves a voice and love, the kind that's real, never starts with perfection, only with presence. See you in the next video, where another story might just help heal another heart.